Member of Parliament for Lakeland, the official opposition Shadow Minister for Natural Resources. So I did just want to touch on the motion and the vote that's happening in the Alberta Legislature right now. We were going to be joined by UCP MLAs, but as you know, they're voting on a crucial motion to condemn bills, the No More Pipelines Bill C-69 and the oil export shipping ban C-48. And certainly I just want to reaffirm the commitment of Andrew Scheer and the federal Conservatives on behalf of all of my federal colleagues who are here that an Andrew Scheer federal Conservative government will repeal the No More Pipelines Bill C-69, and we will kill the anti-evidence, anti-science, anti-fact, anti-Alberta, anti-oil sands, anti-pipeline oil shipping ban C-48. We will bring certainty and predictability for resource development in Canada. We will champion Canadian energy to the world. We will end foreign-funded interference in the Canadian review process for major resource projects. And that has been a coordinated campaign to try to landlock Alberta energy and keep Canada out of providing what is our oil and gas, the most responsible oil and gas in the world, to global markets to meet the growing demand for oil and gas long into the future. I do just, though, want to take this opportunity to urge all Albertans to continue to contact all of the senators in the Senate, because what will happen now is, although in the case of C-48 the Senate committee has made a recommendation not to proceed, it will still go to a vote of the full Senate, and the path for C-69 remains uncertain. So it is still possible that both of these bills will become law by the end of the summer, and so Canadians who are concerned about these anti-energy pieces of legislation must keep urging the senators to stop these bills. And certainly if Conservatives are elected federally in 6 months' time, that will definitively put an end to the No More Pipelines Bill C-69 and the oil shipping ban C-48. So the main reason that we're here today, and I'm so grateful to all of you for being here to help me get this message out to Albertans, is about what happened with the outcome of the rural crime motion 167, which last year passed the House of Commons unanimously with the support of all parties. And I just want to thank and recognize my federal Conservative colleagues who are here today. Glen Motz from Medicine Hat, who is also the Deputy Shadow Minister for Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness. Blaine Calkins, who is the chair of the Alberta Caucus and the Member of Parliament for Red Deer Lacombe. Earl Dreeshen from Red Deer Mountain View, who obviously is an active MP in his own right and also happens to be the dad of Alberta's new agriculture minister, and Arnold Viersen, my neighbor in the northwest, who's an MP from Peace River Westlock. So they're all here today because they also have been working hard on behalf of their constituents to combat the growing crisis of rural crime. And all of the MPs here represent constituents who are facing this epidemic. I also want to thank Cor De Wit, the president of the Alberta Provincial Rural Crime Watch Association, which represents more than 17,000 Albertans and was one of the organizations that endorsed motion 167 calling on the federal Liberals to act to take action against rural crime. And also Conrad Van Heeren, who was a longtime member of the Provincial Rural Crime Watch Association, is from Fort Macleod. And also to recognize Murray Phillips, who is a town councilor out in the county of Two Hills, but who he and his family have faced major instances of rural crime in the last couple of years. And so I just hope maybe if you have questions for really what it's like to live with this crisis, Murray will be able to give you some comments on that. So a year ago, close to today, I was here in Edmonton along with UCP MLAs Jason Nixon, Angela Pitt, and Mike Ellis, and the UCP and the former premier, the leader of the opposition at the time, Jason Kenney, or the premier, the former leader of the opposition, Jason Kenney, provided support to motion 167 at that time. And UCP MLAs have worked very closely with the rural Conservative MPs. We're all here today who struck the Alberta Rural Crime Task Force some years ago to call on all of the elected members in the House of Commons to support motion 167. Because the reality is, and we know this every day in our constituencies, that rural Canada is facing a public safety emergency. And as was the case a year ago, the statistics today continue to back up the experiences of the people that we represent, of all rural Canadians, but also especially of rural Albertans. Recently, on May 7th, you might have heard Statistics Canada confirmed, based on their most recent data, which is from 2017, that rural crime is 23% higher in rural areas than it is in urban areas. And the problem, of course, is the most acute here in the prairie provinces and the highest in rural Alberta. That list includes places in the constituencies of all of the federal members who are here today. Places like Lloydminster and Cold Lake on the border of my riding Lakeland, and North Battleford, also on the border just over on the Saskatchewan side, and also neighboring, and also places like Whitecourt in Arnold's riding, and Red Deer, represented by Earl and Blaine. In my riding, the Elk Point RCMP detachment was ranked recently the highest in Alberta on the crime severity rate index. That news was just reported last week. And the reality, of course, is that frontline law enforcement and support staff in rural communities are stretched thin. According to the Deputy Commissioner for the RCMP in Alberta, there were 230 unfilled positions within the province of Alberta as of April 2017. And the reality for RCMP officers operating in these regions is that they cover hundreds and thousands of square kilometers, and they deal with isolated rural roads and remote communities with challenges with infrastructure and distance and lack of GPS and poor cell service. Also in Lakeland, the Kitscotty detachment covers 2,200 square kilometers, occupied by about 500 people, using a mere 4 RCMP members and not enough support staff, so that RCMP are often out in the regions with no partner, like one at a time. And this reality highlights a key concern by law enforcement stakeholders that came up during Motion 167, that this broad public awareness of dwindling police resources reasonably generates public unease, and it emboldens criminals. The reality is there is increasing organized crimes and criminal activity in rural communities, specifically because of a lack of visible police presence and limited police resources in those rural communities. And the lack of that visible police presence and the long response times, and sometimes in some cases none at all, that makes rural Albertans vulnerable. That's why all of us have undertaken to make contributions to combat rural crime. And I hear loud and clear, as I know all my colleagues do, that rural Albertans are very frustrated with the revolving door of repeat offenders. And that's also related to a lack of frontline law enforcement. But that's why Motion 167 specifically directed the Public Safety Committee to assess and work with provinces and territories specifically on this limited frontline law enforcement and support staff in rural communities. But it's not just law enforcement. The reality goes beyond that. For example, the St. Paul Courthouse in Lakeland has the highest caseload in all of Alberta. In the last couple of years, that caseload rose as high as 2,400 cases filed per Crown prosecutor. And just to put that into context for you, in comparison, at the same time, Edmonton had around 1,000 cases per Crown prosecutor, and in Calgary it was about 800 cases per Crown prosecutor. So as of today, the reality is there are 53 current vacancies for federally appointed judges across Canada, including 8 in Alberta. And so this all adds up to offenders having charges dropped and of delays in trying cases. And farmers, ranchers, and rural Canadians, of course, continue to face unprecedented levels of property crime. And I know many of my constituents, as is the case with the constituents of my colleagues here today, they feel unsafe, and they live with the reality that rural crime imposes real costs on their homes, their properties, their businesses, and their security and their peace of mind. So this is what is incredible, that a year ago on May 30th, the motion did pass with unanimous support in the House of Commons, with 287 yes votes and 0 no votes. It received 101 endorsements from local crime watch groups, provincial MLAs, municipalities, major municipal associations in several provinces, like the Rural Municipalities Association in Alberta and the Saskatchewan Association of Rural Municipalities. And it required the House of Commons Public Safety Committee to report back to Parliament within 6 months. So that would have been by November 30th, 2018. And my colleagues will talk about the experience on the committee, but the reality is that the Liberals delayed the committee's work until the fall, limiting the time and the number of resources who could participate. And then they went way beyond the deadline of issuing the final report and only made it public on May 16th, 2019. And I know my colleagues will get into this, but here's what is totally unconscionable and absolutely unbelievable. The final report that the Liberal-dominated committee issued was a 2-page summary of some witness testimony and no formal recommendations for action, except that provinces and territories should do more. So I think the outcome of Motion 167 and the result of that committee confirms without a shadow of a doubt that the federal Liberal government does not care about rural Canada, and particularly does not care about rural Albertans. And that is even after they sat at that committee and heard directly from Canadians who have been impacted by rural crime. People like Nick Cornea, who represents Farmers Against Rural Crime in Saskatchewan with over 16,000 members, as well as Eddie and Jessica Maurice from Southern Alberta, who had their lives turned upside down when Eddie, after calling the police and being told they weren't coming, had to defend his infant daughter from a home invasion in the middle of the night. And it also included testimony from the Alberta Provincial Rural Crime Watch Association that you'll hear more from today. So here is the fact. In 2015, when the Liberals were elected, the crime rate in Canada rose for the first time in 12 years. But the Liberals have a hug-a-thug, soft-on-crime approach and are going in exactly the wrong direction. And the way that they evaded responsibility, dismissed the real work called on them in this motion, just confirms that they are not concerned with rural Canadians. They are furthering this revolving door approach to prison sentencing. They are reducing sentences for very serious crimes and making Canadians vulnerable. It is the exact opposite of protecting the safety and security of rural Canadians. And the result of this committee should be an affront to every rural Canadian and especially every rural Albertan who has been victimized by unprecedented rates of crime. And after initially supporting the motion, I just think it's unconscionable that the Liberals allowed did not actually follow the direction or really lean into the work instructed to them by Motion 167. I'm glad to see in the throne speech yesterday that the Alberta UCP government has already talked about crime and that there will be more coming action from them, including more Crown prosecutors and providing additional resources for police. And the reality, though, is that many of these tools to tackle rural crime, they remain at the federal level. And so those include changes to the criminal code, to technology and resources provided to frontline RCMP officers, and appointing the full complement of judges. So an Andrew Scheer Conservative government will ensure that that Canadians who live in rural areas can feel safe in their homes, and an Andrew Scheer Conservative government will take real action to combat rural crime. So I'll just maybe ask Glen to make a few comments from your perspective as a member of the committee, and then we'll ask Cor De Wit from the Alberta Provincial Crime Watch Association.
Well, thank you very much, Shannon. Thank you for your leadership on Motion 167. And thank you to our colleagues that are here today and the many others who worked with us. Sitting through committee hearings, it was very, very difficult for those members of us on the committee to hear tales of hardworking Canadians being victimized over and over and over again, of communities working to make their homes look less attractive to criminals, of families being scared to work in their fields because of something might happen to their family at their home. And Conservatives MPs in Alberta felt that we couldn't just sit by and let this problem continue to escalate and watch and do nothing. So that is why we formed what's called the Alberta a real crime task force made up of MPs, Conservative MPs from across Alberta. At the same time that Shannon was putting the motion together and bringing it forward, and we worked collaboratively on that. So, great work together. And what we did is we detailed in that Alberta Real Crime Task Force report what we heard from people all across this province in the town halls and the dozens of town halls that we had. Communities in our province were scared, were suffering, and were struggling because criminals seem to be able to act with impunity. Now, Canadians don't agree on everything, and we know that, but it is a core Canadian value to help those in need and protect innocent people, especially protect people from criminals. And when MP Stubbs brought forward motion 167, as she said, the unanimous support in the House was fantastic, and I was optimistic of where this was going to go. But it was a huge understatement to say that my Conservative colleagues and I were extremely disappointed and angry with the Liberal MPs on the Public Safety and the National Security Committee, and then their two-page report to the heartbreaking and financial hardships and harm that Canadians were suffering at the hand of criminals. Originally, the Liberals didn't even, at committee, the Liberals didn't even bother to bring forward any witnesses. They sought as few meetings as possible. It was only through the constant push of my colleague Blaine Calkins and Jim McGlinskey from Yellowhead and Pierre-Paul Hoos, a colleague from Quebec, and myself, that we were able to get 5 meetings and 14 witnesses brought to committee. One such constituent had this to tell us, and I quote, "As someone who lives in a rural area where crime is almost a daily occurrence, I need the assistance of an authority willing to act before things get out of hand." End of quote. That was the sentiment that we heard from many. We heard from the Alberta and Saskatchewan Crime Watch teams about rising crime rates. And as Shannon has already indicated, rural crime is rising faster and growing faster than urban crime. We heard that most of the criminals that are victimizing our rural residents are actually coming out from our urban centers. Many are repeat offenders, with some out on bail, and many of them with warrants. We heard tales about homes being ransacked and damaged, and their privacies violated, and many times children and family members were hiding in the basement, scared of what those who were upstairs doing and scared of what might happen to them. We heard about victims and residents being victimized 6 or more times. Farmers who had trouble getting insurance because of the number of times they were vandalized or had valuable items stolen. We heard about short-staffed RCMP detachments, RCMP unable to respond to break-and-enters, or taking hours and sometimes days to reach their victims. We heard from an elderly rural resident who confronted two criminals on his own driveway. He had his throat slashed. He was left on his driveway for dead, and it took nearly an hour for first responders to get there. Since that ordeal, that gentleman told our committee that he wished he would have died because of the overwhelming trauma that he experienced. Governments should not ignore rural Canadians just because they don't live in a city. Despite overwhelming evidence presented to committee, the all-urban Liberal MPs took 6 months to draft a 2-page embarrassing report, and it was public servants who stretched that out to 3, not the Liberal MPs. And the evidence presented during the committee study showed critical gaps that are clearly within the mandate and scope of the federal government to address. And I'm going to repeat some of the things that Shannon has said. One, there's a lack of police resources with RCMP detachments, leading to reduced response times that are delayed hours and sometimes days. There is ambiguity in our criminal justice system, in the criminal code, surrounding property rights and self-defense. There are a revolving door, as Shannon called it, and it's so true. Many times rural residents, urban residents, are victimized over and over again by repeat offenders and crime groups who prey on rural Canadians. And many of them are already out on bail, awaiting court on previous convictions. And there is significant hardships that are occurring to our rural residents across the country, mental and physical health challenges, and a lack of services for victims. Canadians deserve better than that, friends, and the safety and security of all Canadians must be the number one priority of any Prime Minister or any government. It is shameful that the Liberals on the Public Safety Committee refuse to take this issue seriously, even after hearing directly from affected Canadians. Victims of real crime deserve the full support of all levels of government. And the commitment you see here today with my colleagues and along with our leader, Andrew Scheer. Instead of taking the issue of increased rural crime rates seriously, the Liberals have watered down the criminal code in Bill C-75 and have taken a revolving door approach, as Shannon has said, to offender accountability and justice reform. And it's time for Justin Trudeau to stop ignoring rural Canadians and to take actions to combat this growing public safety emergency. And my message to them is if the Liberals are unwilling to do their job, they should be set aside in this fall's election for those of us who are willing to protect hardworking Canadians. Thank you.
Thanks, Glen. I'll have Cor from the Alberta Provincial Crime Watch Association give some comments.
I think I'll take the low podium. I would like to thank you for the opportunity to speak on this very important issue. My name is Cor De Wit. I am the current president of the Alberta Provincial Rural Crime Watch Association. Our group applauds MP Shannon Stubbs' efforts on pressing for a study on rural crime in Canada. It was hoped that this study would provide some answers on proven techniques and programs to help reduce criminal property crime statistics in rural Canada. As crime rates fluctuate over time, it will be very beneficial to know the driving factors that influence these rates and thus develop a plan to combat the problem before it becomes a rising statistic. We know that rural crime rates have been on the rise for some time, and the public is getting more and more concerned. This has become very clear as we have seen more interest in our organization in the last number of years than the time that we have been in existence. Media interviews want to know what we can do to reduce crime in rural areas. The public was told that they're not feeling safe in the small rural communities. Response times are slow and unacceptable. In most cases, several hours may elapse between a call and the officer arriving. The RCMP in Alberta have made some headway in lowering some property crime statistics with the crime reduction units, but there is still much to do to reduce to pre-2014 levels. Alberta Provincial Rural Crime Watch Association has been diligent in educating our local membership in crime prevention techniques in the hope that these methods may be adopted by the residents of our rural areas. CPTED, or Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design Principles, have been widely proven to reduce the instances of rural criminal activity, and we are constantly looking for other means to get the message out to the rural residents. We are also encouraging our local Rural Crime Watch groups to have informational meetings stressing the CPTED principles. We at Alberta Provincial Rural Crime Watch are doing our part as a citizen-led group of concerned Albertans, but it'll take a tag team approach with our partners to reduce the crime rates in rural Alberta and Canada. I'd like to thank Shannon Stubbs for the invitation today and for you being here. Thank you.
This is Murray Phillips. He's a county councilor out in the county of Two Hills, where I live, and about the center of my riding. And his family, both his parents and he himself, have had many experiences with rural crime the last little while, just to give you a sense of what that's like to live with.
Good morning. Like I said, I'm Murray Phillips, county councilor, as well as a farmer. I'd like to thank Shannon, our local MP, for all the great work she's done for the Lakeland as well as the county of Two Hills. Crime in our region has skyrocketed in the last 5 years. Our thefts have gone up 240%. The break-in entries have gone up 113%. The possession of stolen property has gone up 100%. And all other crimes are up 77%. The Elk Point area, Elk Point in particular, borders our county. They've just been ranked number 1 in the province for crime severities, as stated by Shannon. People are scared. They're getting tired of this. They're feeling violated. They're angry, they're frustrated, they're ready to act. Our local businesses have been vandalized so many times, windows broken, property stolen. They can't go through their insurance anymore. Their rates are too high, so they're taking it out of pocket or they're closing the doors. This is tough economic times on the eastern part of our province, and this is just affecting us even more. The officers in our county of Two Hills, there's 5 of them right now. At times, they got to go on medical leave. On times, they got to go for training. They cover 3,500 square kilometers. Our night shift is 1 officer. To go from one end of our county to the other takes over an hour and a half. If you were in trouble, do you feel safe with that? That's unacceptable. Our county used to have 2 detachments, 7 officers, and 2 public servants up front to help with administration. We now have 5 and 1. We're downsized. Our population is going up, and we're downsized. It's unacceptable. Many of the individuals that do get arrested, as you saw a couple days ago, they busted $200,000 worth of stolen property near Andrew. They are repeat offenders. They get arrested, that's fine. They go to the judge, they get kicked out on no bail. $1, $100, $500, $1,000. They're out the very next afternoon. Multiple times, our local constable said he's caught the same person the same day that they got out of the courthouse. That's unacceptable. The criminals are not scared. They get caught. Some of them, multiple warrants for their arrest. They've been caught multiple times. They laugh. They're out the very next day because the judge doesn't think that they could afford any bail, so they're out. We need tougher sentences for these people. It's a joke. On our personal farm, we've been vandalized. A tractor, almost $100,000 plus downtime. A local farmer in the area, $30,000 worth of GPS equipment just the other day here. It's shut him down for seeding. Luckily, we have good support behind him to get him up and running again. Windows are smashed. If you lock your fuel tanks, they smash the lock. If you lock your fuel tank on your equipment, they drill a hole in the bottom of it. They steal items that aren't readily accessible during the crunch time, like seeding or harvest. We need to change this. It's affecting everybody. I've also had a vehicle stolen right in front of my house while I was on the snowmobiles with my kids, not 100 feet away. In the middle of the day, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, my vehicle's stolen. This is unacceptable. I have a wife and kids at home. We live on a farm. They don't feel safe when I'm working in the field all day long because these criminals are so brazen and bold that they'll come in at 9 o'clock in the morning and steal anything they want. The police cannot possibly do everything they need to do. They're doing their best. It's not working because we do not have the numbers. The drugs in the area, there's so many factors that are also based because a lot of people do not have jobs in the East. They've turned to crime to make a living. We need to change that. Bill C-69, this needs to happen. We need our economy back. This is affecting crime rates. Rural people need to feel safe again. I could give you a lot more instances that have been personally happened to me as well as my area. And it's shameful. You guys might not hear all of it on the news. You guys might not see all of it, but it's hitting home. The County of Two Hills, the rural farmers, the rural residents of Alberta, we need action. We need something to look forward to. We need more rural police officers. We need this to happen. This is a necessity. One officer for 3,500 kilometers is unrealistic. It's unsafe. It needs to change. We need stronger penalties for these offenders, for the repeat offenders. If you could walk around with 3-4 warrants for your arrest and get off on $1 bail, That's not justice. We need action on motion M-167, and we need it now. Thank you. For what? I did.
Oh, you did.
Sir.
I was maybe telling you. Fly. Thanks, Mary. I don't know, Glen, do you want to come back up with me? Although we're so tall. Let me just say I'm very pleased to be joined by some UCP MLAs who do happen to be overlapping from the Lakeland area. Jackie Armstrong, Hominek. Oh no, the riding name's changed. Fort Saskatchewan, Biggerville, yes. David Hansen. I know the whole area, Bonnyville, St. Paul.
Bonnyville, Cold Lake, St. Paul.
Bonnyville, Cold Lake, St. Paul, and Garth Russell from Vermilion, Lloydminster did that one.
And Wainwright, yeah.
And Wainwright.
Yeah.
And I know there's Roger Reed here from down south of Calgary. He's Conrad's MLA, but sorry that the timing didn't work out for the important vote that they were having condemning Bills C-69, C-48. I think we'd be happy to take some questions, or if you'd like to ask questions of any of the people who spoke here today.
I've got some questions actually. Okay, so this the Federal Conservative Party came out with a
Oh, look at that.
Yeah, la-di-da. The Federal Conservative Party, as you probably know, did come up with a rural crime report last year. There was some confusion as to whether that was actually your blueprint or what you would do as a government. Does that, in fact, outline some of the actions you would take should you be elected in the fall?
Like I said, thanks for the question. Like I said, the Alberta, you're referring to the Alberta Rural Crime Task Force report.
Yep.
That report was a reflection of the town hall meetings that rural conservatives in Alberta had with their constituents. So we committed to Alberta residents that we would report what they told us. And so that report reflects what they told us.
Right, but does it...
And then that report was given to the committee to take the information from it. And as you could tell, the Liberals paid little attention to what the real Albertans said.
Yeah, it was a very short federal report. I would definitely agree with you there. But my question is, would that be a blueprint in any way for a CPC government?
I think it's fair to say that any responsible government listens to the constituents we serve, and those issues those matters that constituents feel are important and are doable and responsible to look at from a justice perspective, from a law enforcement perspective, from crime prevention perspective, I think are worthy of consideration. And they're not a blueprint. I said this is a reflection of what Albertans told us, and so it would be important for us to consider everything that we're told by Canadians.
So the UCP did use their rural crime report as a blueprint for the changes that I think you're making now. But I'm just curious then, why make a host of recommendations if it's not something that your party would actually do? I mean, there's interesting stuff in there, like enhancing electronic monitoring of repeat offenders, which is what the UCP wants to do, federal tax credit for private individuals who buy and install home security systems, stuff like that.
Right.
Right. So why have those recommendations if it's not something that you really want to do? Or do
Well,
you want to do?
I didn't say we wanted to do them or we didn't want to do them. We're going to look at every opportunity that we have to improve public safety in this country, including rural Canada, and those recommendations that Albertans made, that other Canadians have made through the committee, through their submissions to the committee, will be given.
Pointed to actually that has worked in some of the places that have been targeted by the rural crime things. So
yeah, I appreciate you asking this. That actually is exactly the reason why the Liberals' abdication of doing any real work as a result of the direction from M-167 is such a tragedy. Because so far, the early results from the Targeted Rural Crime Reduction Task Force has been working. There have been successes in Lakeland about that, and I know across the province. So the point was that announcement was made at roughly the same time when Motion 167 passed the House of Commons. And what I said actually here in Edmonton about a year ago was, this is perfect. Now the committee can undertake real work to assess the outcomes and whether or not that targeted increase of frontline law enforcement in rural communities is making a difference. Well, we know now, a year ago, it has. But the committee, the Liberal-dominated committee, completely failed in actually working effectively with all the provinces and territories and making concrete recommendations. I think it's fair for Albertans to say, look, our experience is that these targeted crime reduction strategies with increased law enforcement and police visibility in rural communities worked, so therefore there should be a conversation between the federal government and provincial and territorial governments about how it is we fix the limited law enforcement resources of rural and remote communities. But the Liberals, by completely abdicating their responsibility and doing a deep dive into the issues that were instructed to them to do by Motion 167, completely lost the opportunity to actually start that work with provincial and territorial governments. We can commit that we certainly look forward to the progress and the work that I know the UCP government of Alberta will undertake. They talked about rural crime in their throne speech yesterday. They talked about it through the campaign. I know from their previous support of Motion 167 and working with rural Alberta members of Parliament that is a high priority to them and to Premier Kenney. And certainly on behalf of the federal Conservative team, we look forward to working in whatever way we can with the Alberta's UCP government to help take action on this rising crisis in rural communities. But and then certainly if Canadians, if we earn the trust and confidence of Canadians in 5 or 6 months' time, Andrew Scheer federal Conservative government will certainly make that a high priority. I think just to touch on to your questions about policy, we have made an announcement already specific to gang-related crime, and so you probably know that we've talked about cracking down on the criminals that profit from rural crime, also to revoke parole for criminals who are committing crimes on behalf of a gang, which is actually one of the factors driving the rising increases of rural crime because of a lack of frontline law enforcement presence, which is what this committee was supposed to study in depth but didn't as a result of the Liberals delaying the time and limiting the witnesses and the work of the, I know, dedicated Conservative and frankly I should say NDP members too of that committee who wanted to undertake a real work on all of the issues pointed out in the motion. We've also announced we will crack down on the criminal enterprises that are fueling the drug epidemic, which, as Murray Phillips announced, is one of the factors driving increasing rural crime. And I know that we will, over the coming months, continue to make announcements on what an Andrew Scheer Conservative government will do with relation to stopping the revolving door of crime or put the rights of law-abiding Canadians first and sufficiently support victims of crime in coming months and then also in the campaign.
I just wanted to ask about something specific in the dissent, which is there's a line that says, I quote, "They could commit to providing support for police and prosecutors on charges against individuals who defend themselves and their families." What does that mean?
Well, I think I'm just trying to remember exactly what's the context in front of it and behind it. I have it in my briefcase, but I think it's important to recognize that there's ambiguity right now in the criminal code. People are confused. We had witnesses. We had Solomon Friedman from the Criminal Trial Lawyers Association of Canada come to a committee and tell us, listen, the Canadian government, legislators have a responsibility to clear up the ambiguity in somebody defending themselves and their property. And that's exactly what that refers to is, people don't know what they can and can't do. Do you run away and hide? Do you confront and try and protect yourself and your family? What do you do? So there needs to be some clarity of language. There needs to be some clarity of direction for both police and Crown on how to address those issues. And they're obviously on a case-by-case basis, but there are certainly some suggested amendments to the criminal code in language that can make that clear. It was indicated by the Criminal Trial Lawyers Association, who himself has said he's defended people who face this exact issue. And so, they're victimized again. So they're victimized by having their home broken into, property stolen, assaulted during that activity, and then they try to defend themselves, and they become the target of criminal prosecution in some cases. And so there needs to be some clarity around how that should look moving forward.
Do you have any suggestions offhand right now what that clarity might look like?
Well, again, I think it's important that as we develop those positions, we would We would seek the advice from people like Solomon Friedman from the Criminal Trial Lawyers Association, from experts, prosecutors, so that we balance charter issues with legislation, with criminal code, to ensure that whatever the position is, strikes a balance, an appropriate balance for public safety, and ensure that people can appropriately manage and care for their own property and not put public safety at risk.
Right. And lastly, I wanted to ask you about the statement from Jessica and Edward Maurice, and they say that they felt like the Liberals only invited witnesses who were, pushing gun control and things like that. And I got the sense that you folks feel the same way, but I just wanted to ask for a comment on that.
Thank you for that question. It's difficult to be able to put together in a few minutes exactly all the feelings you have about what the Liberals should have done and didn't do. But you're right. Their dismissive approach to this entire issue of real crime reinforced the fact that they had 6 MPs who were from urban Canada and had no idea what real crime was about. Even you can understand or hear it. If you want to go back and for some entertainment value, go back and listen to those questions that were asked at committee. You can still see them on Parview, and listen to what they asked. Like, they just don't get it, and it was so obvious by the dismissive attitude they had. They wanted to brush it away. The fact that they delayed it, as long as they delayed it, just reinforced that they could care less that this is a real issue, because to them, urban Canada is their voter base generally, not rural Canada. So they ignore it, and I think that's a message that Albertans and Canadians all across this country. Alberta's not the only one facing real crime issues. BC, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Maritimes, Ontario and Quebec do as well, but they have provincial policing there and have a little different response mechanism in place. They need to understand that they matter. Urban Canada is not the only people that matter. They do matter, but they don't matter more than rural Canada. And so the Liberals send a very clear message by advocating any sort of responsibility and saying it's all the province's issue, it's all the territory's problem. It is not. It definitely is not. Great question. Thanks.
I'm just wondering if the federal Conservative, if in government, would you pursue ways or change the criminal code for people to use force as a reasonable self-defense mechanism? I know it's kind of been suggested here provincially, but...
Well, the criminal code, I was in law enforcement for 35 years before I took up this gig, and I have to tell you that there are pretty consistent language in the criminal code right now on, I'm just trying to remember, is it sections 25 or 34, 35, thank you, that you can use as much force as is reasonable necessary to protect yourself and your property. What does that mean? What actually does that mean in practicality? How do you play that out? And should an RCMP officer or any law enforcement agency who goes to a scene of a crime where the original victim of the crime then defended themselves and then becomes the accused of a crime, how do you navigate that? And there's no real jurisprudence around doing that. And so I think clarity of code, clarity of language, some common law and common sense application needs to be applied. And I think it's important that that as a new government, as a Conservative government, we pursue that so that we do not re-victimize people over and over and over again. And we're committed to doing that.
Hi, this is a bit of an unrelated question. Jason Kenney has said probably that he wants to see Justin Trudeau gone as much as you do. What kind of a role do you wish he would play in the upcoming campaign?
What role do we think that
Jason Kenney should play in the campaign?
I think just as Andrew Scheer and the the Conservative members of Parliament and the full federal Conservative team worked in cooperation to help Premier Jason Kenney and all of the UCP MLAs get elected to become the new government of Alberta, we look forward to working with our provincial family members and counterparts to defeat Justin Trudeau and the federal Liberals in the next election.
And I'm sure you've seen that across this country that Conservative family is growing provincially, and it's exciting, very exciting.
So I just want to clarify, kind of simplify all the information that's kind of been tossed around here today. You want to see increased RCMP presence in the rural communities, as well as kind of a change in the language in the laws right now with farmers or rural people protecting themselves when someone does go onto their property. I just want to kind of clarify, like, just to simplify it a little bit.
Well, that's yes. We need federally and provincially an understanding of appropriate detachment size. That when detachments say have 5 individuals to them as a detachment, and you have 2 or 3 of them gone on course in court or on sick leave, how do they get backfilled? The RCMP have federal mandates across this country, and they're spread very, very thin. And where do you see the members taken from? Like the immigration crisis we have with illegal border crossers. RCMP detachments, rural detachments from across this country, went down to Quebec and to help with that situation. So what happens in those areas when those positions are gone? We see exactly what happens. We talked about a change in language. Yes, there's a need to look at the criminal code. There's also a need to ensure that the justice system, and it's the parts of the justice system that have some touch points now, some weaknesses, that they be given attention. Like, when I was in policing, which wasn't that long ago, there's a reverse onus component, which means that if you are already out in charge of the criminal offense and you commit another one, the onus is on you to be released. That seems to be more difficult now. So if you've already committed a criminal offense and you get released and you commit another one, it used to be that you wouldn't get out. That's what Canadians think is reasonable. You could prevent a whole lot of repeat offenses and re-victimizing individuals if the justice system would work as how it's intended. And so there needs to be some consideration of the bail reform and how that needs to look. And so there's a lot of work for us to do when we get in government this fall.
I would say my call to action for today, too, is this, that every rural Albertan and every rural Canadian should contact Ralph Goodale, the Minister of Public Safety, and tell him to do the work instructed by Motion 167, which was this: to do a thorough assessment of the current rural crime rates and trends, of the existing RCMP and other policing resources and policies in rural, remote, and Indigenous communities, to examine the current partnerships with provincial, municipal, and Indigenous police forces, to provide recommendations on improving rural crime prevention and curbing emerging crime rates, to talk about measures to increase the tactical and operational effectiveness of Indigenous police forces, strategies and resources dedicated to the judicial and rehabilitation systems in rural areas, and improve support for victims of rural crime. That was supposed to be the work that the committee was supposed to have done, to make comprehensive, concrete recommendations. But when you limit a committee to 5 meetings, to 5 meetings, to a handful of witnesses, when you then delay the issuing of the report 6 months past the deadline, which was deliberate in the motion, because this is a real crisis facing rural Albertans and rural Canadians right now. So they needed to take action on this 6 months ago, a year ago. I think every rural Albertan and every rural Canadian should call the Minister of Public Safety, email him, go to his office and say, this is unacceptable, that it is not appropriate, that it is unconscionable and irresponsible for the Liberal-dominated committee to have dismissed the important, comprehensive, thorough work of this motion, which was both originally drafted by me, but also included an amendment from the NDP, which is partly what got it, the unanimous support of every single member of the House of Commons, of all parties. And tell him to take this seriously, stop ignoring this crisis, and tell Canadians exactly what the Liberals are going to do to combat rural crime. And if they can't do it, then an Andrew Conservative government is going to do it after October 2019.
So thanks, Shannon. One more thing that I forgot to mention is that at the conclusion, the very last day when the report, the committee was done sitting, and the Liberals, had passed their motion, they closed the debate at committee, and they immediately moved a motion that the public safety minister look at some of the things that were in the motion. And we had all opportunity at the committee to do that, and they just absolutely ignored it. So they just gave lip, typical liberals federally, they give lip service and don't do anything into action.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for being here.